Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another interview with Independence. I'm your host, Jarell Corley. Today we have a very special guest, Eric Bonner of Veterans for Political Innovation. Today we're going to talk to Eric about his work and how he's trying to change the way we vote in this country. So Eric, take it away.
Jarell, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you and your heart for building the independent movement in America, and of course, your service to our country. So as Jarell mentioned, I'm Eric Bonner. I'm the founder and chief operating officer for Veterans for Political Innovation. That's a mouthful. What are we all about? We're about mobilizing veterans and supporters from across the country and across the political spectrum to advocate for three powerful, nonpartisan election innovations that will make our politics less toxic through healthy competition. That's what we're working on.
So Eric, can you tell us about those three initiatives or those three reforms that you guys are working on to pass?
Yes, so the three reforms we are laser focused on are open primaries, voting innovations such as ranked choice voting. There's others out there as well. And the combination of those two things, which is either called Final Four or Final Five voting.
Okay, now, open primaries, are you working to get that done on the federal or state level?
So we're working state by state because our theory of change is a state-based theory of change because states control about 90% of our election laws. They're the ones who administer elections. I'm talking to you from my shed quarters here in St. Louis, Missouri. I know you've been here before. In Missouri, for example, there's 116 local election authorities. It's our state that runs and administers elections. So if we're going to change the way we do elections, it needs to be a state-by-state initiative.
Okay, and so these open primaries, would those be for state elections only?
They would be for everything. That's a great question. So it would be for state and federal offices. And that's the one of many things most people don't understand about elections, right? We have at least three levels of elections going on. You have local elections, which is your city or your county. You have state elections, and then you have the federal elections for U.S. Congress, for the House of Representatives. And then really the presidential election is kind of a whole nother animal, so to speak.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I was recently speaking to someone about this concept of open primaries, and one of their concerns was, okay, so Illinois is a heavily Democratic state.
Right.
So one of the concerns that this young lady posed to me was, with open primaries, how could you prevent the Republican Party manipulating the election and having all Republican candidates? Is that a genuine concern? And if so, how would you address that?
Yeah, so sometimes we hear that concern here in Missouri as well. Something similar, maybe slightly different. People talk about strategic voting. One thing we have to be clear about, we're talking about primary elections. Most Americans, one, don't participate in primary elections. Two, they're really not well understood. Most people don't understand that, for example, in 2020, 83% of our Congress was elected by 10% of eligible voters because only 10% of eligible voters participated in primary elections. And they were in districts that are so red or so blue that whoever won that primary election is automatically the winner. So to answer your question, sometime in Missouri, for example, as an independent voter, I can go into our August primary and they'll ask me, do you want the Democratic ballot or do you want the Republican ballot? To which I'd like to respond, well, that's actually my ballot. I'm an independent voter. It shouldn't belong to the parties. It should belong to we the people. So that's the first way they divide us. But in Missouri, it's called a semi-open primary. I can choose one or the other. And sometimes what's happened in the past is if there's a candidate that one party really thinks is going to be the weakest for the other party, you'll see strategic voting. People will pull the Republican ballot even though they're a Democrat, just to get the weakest Republican elected, for example. But
so So the strategic voting, how does that work? Is that like a coordinated, I guess, conspiracy, we could say? Like some groups are like getting voters together and telling them, hey, vote for the weakest link on the other side so he can win and then be faced off with the stronger candidate from the other side in the general election?
It's,
That
really, Jarell, from my research, there's only anecdotal evidence of this happening a couple times and not in massive numbers.
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't happen very often. It's an overblown fear that's used to say this is why we
Right.
need partisan primaries.
That makes sense.
But if it was a problem, what I say to my friends who think that's a problem, even though it's not, I say, okay, then the solution is not closing our primaries and letting only Republicans and Democrats vote, because that locks out the close to 50% of veterans like you and I who don't identify with either party. The answer is an open primary, which is everyone running on one ballot, regardless of party. Because then if you're only going to pick, if only the top two or top four finishers move on to November, there is no Republican candidate that's going to say, go vote for a Democrat or vice versa. In
Right.
an open primary,
Right.
you want to win and you're competing against everyone. Healthy competition is good for us. That's why we want open primaries.
Right. I don't I think that like you said, I think that theory is quite overblown in the real world. I don't think it would actually even work. It would take too much energy for what? I mean, it makes sense theoretically, but I just don't think it would play out very well in the real world.
Yep,
That
you're
makes sense.
exactly right.
But I don't but I'll get back to her on that point. I do know also she was saying that she was fully on board with the ranked choice voting.
Okay.
Now, can you tell us why ranked choice voting might be the preferred method of electoral reform versus open primaries? I believe this is also a belief you share as well, right?
It is. I'm most excited about combining an open primary where the top 4 or 5 candidates go to the general, regardless of party, and then using a ranked choice ballot in the general election in November. And sometimes ranked choice voting is also called instant runoff voting because that's what a ranked ballot enables, an instant runoff, which means if no candidate gets over 50%, the lowest candidate is done, and then anyone who voted for that candidate as their first choice, their votes are now transferred to their second choice until one remaining candidate has over 50%. So it does an instant runoff instead of the expensive Georgia runoff 1 month later, which the candidates raised over $45 million for in 1 month. This all happens instantaneously.
Okay,
So
makes sense.
ranked choice voting is great for so many reasons. The negative attack ads in the system I just described, top 4 or final 5 voting, negative attack ads don't work. So how nice would that be to have a fall where you don't have negative attack ads where it's just demonizing that if you elect so and so, they will destroy this country. That doesn't work in a
Right.
top 4 or top 5 race.
The candidates actually have to, they have an incentive to actually like come up with ideas and base their platform off ideas that they're going to work versus distracting and deflecting and like you
Yes.
said mudslinging. I think it
Yes.
would clean up our elections and make them much more respectable.
It will. I mean, more competition in every other industry. That's how the customer gets better results, right? How many fast food restaurants do we have? And if you don't like one, if they don't serve you well, you can go to a different one, right? We need healthy competition in politics. We need to get away from Coke versus Pepsi. Some people might want to drink RC Cola or Hanson's or whatever,
Right.
right? But we don't
Right.
even give them that choice in our two-party duopoly.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Okay. Can you? I know that you recently received about 300,000 signatures for something going on back in St. Louis. Like, what exactly was that for? Can you explain what that process was like and what you were doing exactly?
Yeah, so that was Veterans for Political Innovation. We work with state coalition partners to pass Final Four or Final Five voting in states across the country. We're really excited because Alaska has adopted Final Four voting. Wisconsin has legislation pending. And now there's a ballot amendment in Missouri called Better Elections Missouri. It's for the Alaska model. So for state and federal elections, a top 4 open primary plus ranked choice voting. We're bringing that to Missouri, and we're bringing Final Five voting to Nevada via a ballot amendment right now as well.
Okay, so right now you're pushing for a ballot amendment.
In Missouri, so the 300,000 signatures, you need about 170,000 signatures.
You wanted more because you wanted to, in case they got purged, you wanted to make sure you had more than enough. Now, were you out there on the foot? Were you out there on foot collecting all those signatures yourself, or like did you have help?
Yeah, so it's a mix of volunteers and then professional paid signature gatherers.
Okay.
It's such a big statewide effort. It would be nearly impossible to do it as an all volunteer force.
Right.
Right. So I personally gathered close to 200 signatures. I was outside of my local polling place for my local municipal elections.
Wait, you said you alone gathered over 200,000 signatures?
No, 200.
Oh, okay. 200 signatures. Okay. All right. All right.
That would have been amazing. 200,000, man. I would have been, full-time job 7 days a week.
Hey, man, that's the 1%, that controls it all, right?
Yeah. So no, thankfully there was a professional statewide organization helping out, and we turned in those 300,000 signatures to our Missouri Secretary of State on Mother's Day. And now he will get to certify these signatures, and we'll find out probably in July.
Okay.
It'll be Amendment 2 probably, or Amendment 3, and then the campaign will shift to yes on Amendment 2, vote yes. Jarell, you all in Illinois, though, you don't have the ballot initiative.
No, we don't. I think that there might be some work going on the ground level to get a foundation established to hopefully, bring something like that in the near future. That would be a great idea. It would definitely be a game changer. So basically, right now, if you guys have the required amount of signatures, it will be placed on the ballot, and then the people have to vote for it in November. You have to vote yes on 2.
Yes.
Okay. Well, hey, I like that. That's actually very reminiscent of my time in Florida when I worked on the medical marijuana campaign. Yes on 2. With John Morgan. So if you guys are from Missouri and if you're voting in this election, remember yes on 2. So.
And just to make it easy, because we don't officially know the number yet. It could be 2 or 3, but here's the good news. The other amendment is to legalize marijuana in Missouri. Okay. So let's make it easy. Vote yes on 2 and 3.
Is that medical or recreational?
In honor of Michael Jordan. It's recreational.
I like it.
Yes on 2 and 3 for Better Elections Missouri and recreational marijuana, which I don't normally even mention, but I'm doing it here because we don't know the number yet.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I like that a lot. Okay, so what else did I want to talk about? So not really how can we get how would you get that sort of thing started, but I really so you guys are working with Nevada. Can you tell us a little bit about how the actual ballot, like the ballot initiative and the language for the memorandum? It's memorandum, correct? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's
or legislative initiative. What is it?
Well, it's
a referendum.
There's many different names for it. Citizens Initiative Petition. And the initiative petition language normally gets drafted by an attorney. Okay. There's 5 paragraphs on our petition. You can read the whole thing at betterelectionsmo.org.org.
So how long did that process take to draft the amendment?
So the attorneys, started working on it last June, and they turned it into the Secretary of State. I think it was either late June, early July. Okay. And there was 1 or 2 redrafts because of some issues with some language. and then it was certified by the end of last July.
So who had issues with the language, the activist or the state?
There, from my understanding, there were some technical issues with the way it was drafted at first that needed to get corrected, which that happens sometimes, right? Everyone makes mistakes, even high-paid attorneys.
Most definitely, most definitely. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I guess, we're trying to understand, the process from conception of an idea all the way through passage of the amendment on the ballot. Do you mind maybe just going into that, like on the surface level a little bit?
Yeah,
Surface level?
On a surface level, and our Secretary of State actually has a great like one-page overview of the process where you can kind of trace it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it really goes from an idea to drafting the language, submitting it to the Secretary of State, and there's usually 50 to 100, maybe more, of these petitions that get certified. That's actually kind of the easy part of the process. I mean, it wouldn't be easy for a layperson to draft language, but you get it drafted, you get it certified, but then you have to gather the signatures. That's the hardest part, right? And you have to get a certain percentage of voters from 6 out of the 8 congressional districts in Missouri. It's something like at least 8 or 10% of voters who voted in the last general election in 6 out of our 8 districts have to sign the petition in order for there to be enough for it to become an official ballot amendment.
Okay. So the election official has to sign up on it as well.
Yeah, the Secretary of State, and then signs off on the language that's drafted. Actually goes through a quick process. It goes to the state auditor. It goes to the state attorney general, because you have to look at how much is this going to cost Missouri taxpayers. It's called the fiscal note that has to be attached to it.
Cost them in what sense? Like cost them after it's passed, if it's passed?
Right. So some things like medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, they're not going to cost the state anything, not much to enact, and it's going to bring in tax revenue. Other ballot amendments, other ideas such as expanding Medicaid, which is something we did in Missouri in 2020, that's actually going to cost a whole lot of money.
Right.
So there needs to be an estimate, a note that goes along with the proposed language.
Will your initiative cost the taxpayers money?
It's a modest amount. The short answer is yes, but it's a very modest amount because there are some election machines, some voting machines that need to be upgraded.
Right.
Mostly it's just software updates. It's just
upgrade.
Like upgrading your iPhone, right? There's a couple local election authorities that might need to purchase some new equipment, but the fiscal note, the range was something like, I'm going off the top of my head, 2 million to 4 million as a one-time cost, but then it's going to save the state money in the long run because of the way we're doing the election or proposing to do it. There'll be fewer ballots needed. You won't have separate Republican, Democrat ballot, and other reasons that are going to save taxpayers money in the long run.
And hopefully they'll have a healthier culture, and maybe it'll save them money in the long run.
That's the bottom line.
Responsibility and everything.
That's the bottom line, Jarell. And the reason we're doing, I mean, the idea really comes from this book that I shared with you, the Politics Industry book. Katherine Gehl, Wisconsin businesswoman, Michael Porter, Harvard Business School professor. They were the ones that they outline all the problems with modern politics in America: partisan gridlock, toxic polarization. Congress is getting less and less done by any measure. Why is that? Because of partisan primary elections. Everyone who gets elected to office, their biggest fear is being primaried. It's now a verb, by someone farther to their right or farther to their left. So they were the ones who proposed final 5 voting, which is a top 5 open primary and ranked choice voting as the solution. And there's people who've read this book and this research that are so excited about it that they started ballot amendments in Alaska, Nevada. There's legislation pending in Wisconsin and Missouri. There's a ballot amendment we're running.
Okay. So it seems as if there's a push to do this because it might bring everyone back center for the most part.
Well,
is that
you're not wrong in saying that at all. Katherine Gehl, when she talks about this, she's quick to say, we're not trying to just get moderates elected or centrists, because that's not going to solve all of our problems. Some of our problems need more radical ideas, actually,
Right. Okay.
to solve them. But it's going to incentivize problem solving.
Right.
It's going to incentivize common sense compromise. It's going to incentivize a new type of candidate that just doesn't exist in our current divided duopoly.
That makes sense. That makes sense, because right now, I think I touched on this in one of my earlier videos, is that no one really stands for anything anymore. You feel like they're really just talking points that they may or may not even believe. It's just more so, like you said, they're far left, far right ideas that are galvanizing that base of voters that are going to get them into the primaries so they can make it to the general and then win. And they may switch their language up and they may soften their tone because they have to appeal to a broader base of voters. But by that time, it's too late. So we really want to, create that incentive to appeal to a broader base of voters out the gate from the very beginning.
Yes, that's exactly it, Jarell. I mean, right now, you have people who, to your point, right? There's a playbook. The politics industry has figured out how to manipulate our low turnout partisan primary elections. And in a crowded field, in a partisan primary, you only need about 3%, 3 to 5% of the voters to win. And if that district has been gerrymandered, so it's bright red or bright blue, meaning it's a vast majority Republican or vast majority Democrat, then whoever wins that crowded primary field is automatically going to be the winner in November, right? And they don't even represent a majority of their constituents, didn't even vote for them. Not even close to a majority voted, right? So that's the problem we're trying to solve, which is healthy competition in every general election. To your friend's question earlier, Jarell, in Missouri, there are some districts, because we're a bright red state, where we might end up with 3 or 4 Republicans in the general election. That's possible. As an independent, that doesn't bother me, because with ranked choice voting, they are going to have to distinguish themselves and still appeal to, they have to win with a true majority. So even if it is 3 or 4 Republicans in a very red district, they now are appealing to all of their constituents instead of that very small primary voting block.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. And that's in the primary, basically.
Well, but what we're pushing for is for the real competition to happen in the general election. Okay. So what I'm saying is, with a top 4 open primary in Missouri, there are some districts that are very, very red. It's a bright red state. And out of that primary, you might get 4 Republicans might make it to the general election. In certain areas of Missouri, that's possible. In the city of St. Louis, it's just opposite. It'll probably be 4 Democrats. But they will have to run differently. They'll have to compete against each other differently, and they're competing for the votes of everyone in their district, not just their primary voters.
Right. Okay, so these primary voters, who do they normally consist of?
Well, so there's some interesting data and polling data about this. This is a report I got. It's called The Hidden Tribes of America from 2018. And it's by a group called More in Common. And they did this really in-depth research of over 8,000 Americans. And what they found was that they broke it up into 7 groups. The group on the farthest right is devout conservatives. They're the most conservative, devout conservatives. That's 6% of our population. The group on the farthest left is progressive activists. These 2 groups, listen to what they have in common. The whitest group, devout conservatives on the far right. The second whitest group, the progressive activists on the far left. The wealthiest group, progressive activists on the far left. The second wealthiest group, devout conservatives. The most active on social media, both of these extremes. The most likely to participate in partisan primary elections, both of these extremes. This is why we are being torn apart by two sides of the same coin in America. And so, a lot of times people don't even realize they're kind of they've just been co-opted by some bot, some Russian bot who made them angry about something that didn't even really happen, right? And now they're posting and they're sharing about it on Facebook and tearing apart the other side. And that's exactly what these foreign countries that have figured out how to manipulate our own social media against us, that's exactly what they're doing every single day.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I think I'd like to start, wrapping it up.
Sure.
We have about 7 more minutes or so, and then I'd like to talk to you offline about some things.
Sure.
So, that I think that's great. I think you're doing a lot of great work, and I think that, the light is at the end of the tunnel and we're closely reaching it. So, right now, how many states have some form of initiative such as this: open primaries, ranked choice voting, fair top five, or final five voting?
Yeah,
But how many states in the union you think have some sort of initiative?
that's a great question. So as far as truly open primaries, there's only 5 states.
Oh, really?
It's California, Washington, Alaska, Nebraska, and Louisiana.
What about Nevada?
No,
Not
Nevada
Nevada. No, is it Nebraska? They were the first one, right? Back in the early
Nebraska is
1900s.
unique because they have a unicameral state legislature. They have one branch in their state legislature, and everyone runs on one ballot for the state legislature. It's not divided Republican, Democrat.
What just passed in Maine? That's not true open primaries?
So Maine has ranked choice voting, and it now has semi-open primaries. So, and this gets confusing, right, Jarell? But this was one of the first bills we advocated for as an organization, was to move Maine from closed partisan primary elections. And to be clear, a closed primary, which is New York State, Pennsylvania, Florida, some of our biggest states, you and I would not be allowed to vote in the primary election. Unaffiliated voters, independent voters, which there's at least 20 million of us in America, maybe more, do not get to participate in closed primary states at all. You have to register with a private political party. That's what Maine had until they passed a semi-open primary bill. This last session, we helped lobby for it, which will allow independent voters to choose the Republican or the Democrat primary ballot.
Okay.
That's a semi-open primary.
I believe that's what we have here in Illinois, because I was at a forum a few weeks ago and I was actually trying to change my registration identification from Democrat to independent, but they don't allow that here in Illinois. So, but they do, I think it's a semi-open primary because they do allow you to choose either Republican or Democratic ballot, but they don't have party identification on the actual voter registration.
So openprimaries.org has a great map of all the states and all of their rules. I wish I had the link handy, but excuse me, you can find it on openprimaries.org. But yeah, so states that use ranked choice voting, though, Maine is one of them. Alaska now has this top 4 open primary system we're trying to pass in Missouri. And then cities in Utah, over 40 cities in Utah use ranked choice voting. New York City used ranked choice voting. The Republican Party in Virginia used ranked choice voting to nominate Glenn Youngkin, who went on to win for governor. 6 southern states use ranked choice ballots for their overseas and military voting, right? So it's used very broadly from on the right of center and left of center. And unfortunately, there's some politicians who are trying to demonize ranked choice voting and make it out to be the boogeyman that's going to make red states blue or something. And it's absolutely false. Absolutely false.
That makes sense. Okay, Eric, look, it's been a great, interview. It's been lovely having you here on the channel with us today. Closing remarks. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the audience?
Thanks, Jarell. Thanks so much for your time. And my problem, as you can probably tell, is I'm very passionate about this. I can go too deep into the weeds really quick. The summary of why all of this is important: more choice equals more power. for voters. And right now, if you're an independent or unaffiliated voter, you are a second-class citizen in your own democracy. Your taxpayer dollars that pay for your elections, some of them you don't even get to fully participate in. In Colorado, there's more registered unaffiliated voters than Democrats and Republicans combined. So
Oh, wow.
this is the next wave. Independent, unaffiliated voters, fastest growing demographic in almost every single state. So the two-party duopoly does not even make sense anymore, but it's up to us, all of us, to advocate to change the system itself. We need to stop yelling at each other about hot button issues that are being used just to tear us apart. We need to come together and fix the system itself as a top priority.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense, Eric. Well, look, thank you for your work. I appreciate what you're doing. You're definitely an inspiration, and we will be in touch, and maybe we can have you on again at some point in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Jarell. Thanks for having me, and all the best to you with your upcoming transition.
All right. Thank you, Eric. We'll be in touch soon.
See ya.